Many stories describe horrific crimes that remain unknown to this day. These are not just crimes being investigated by the police. They are scary stories that happened to people whose lives were as normal as anyone else's. You may not think events are rational or logical, but our narrative today is realistic. It is one of the most interesting historical stories in Germany. It is not just a terrifying crime that took the life of an entire family. It is classified as strange phenomena, and not just heinous crimes, the story of the Bavarian family. Today's story revolves around a German family living in Bavaria. This family was studied for the crime that happened to them over a period of time that no one can understand, as the family murder was studied for 85 years. This may seem unusual to others, and there is no denying that the issue has been under consideration for a long time. The investigation began in 1922 and ended in 2007. The crime took place in March and on 31, and the family that was the victim of this tragedy was the Gruber family, including the housekeeper who worked in the dormitory. The family members were killed, along with the maid. There were 5 family members, and they all died. 6 months before the crime, it all started. He worked as a housewife. This maid was used to hearing unusual sounds in the vicinity of the house. She could hear the sound of knocks on the windows of the house, and sometimes also recognize the sound of whispers in the hallways and other sounds that made her hearer feel very uncomfortable. The maid did not hesitate to tell family members what she had heard, but family members did not believe the maid and instead told her that it was all preparations. The maid was sure she had heard those calls, and as a result she no longer had the ability to continue working and decided to leave. That is what actually happened. The situation remained the same until the day before the crime, when the family decided to bring a new maid to the crew. That evening, the new maid arrived, and the family heard the same strange sounds that the previous maid had told them. In addition, the family noticed some unusual things, and the doubt that grew at home without understanding the cause of these events. For example, a father found on the floor a newspaper he or a family member had never bought before, with the keys to the storage room that contained the equipment that family members used on a daily basis lost. All of these things may be normal, but one day a suspicious event happened. The weather was very cold, and snow covered the ground heavily. A family member noticed unusual effects on the snow. These traces come from the forest and reach the house, not only the house itself, but also areas inside the house. Otherwise, the terrifying aspect is that these marks are the remains of a creature or a person who entered the dwelling and did not come out. The effects show that this object is still in the dwelling. Horror began to creep into the family's heart, and they remembered the words of the former maid well. The father, referred to in the clip as Andreas, informed his neighbor, also referred to as Andreas, about the incident. He even shared the details of his previous maid conversation with him. The neighbor recommended that he arm himself in case of an emergency, but Andreas refused to do so. On that particular day, the day that all members of the family were killed, the crime took place. There was a real killer who had infiltrated the house. That day, the criminal took each family member one by one to the barn to slaughter them. 4 family members were killed and put in the barn. For the 5th person, she was a little girl. The killer killed her and her new maid in the house. The unusual thing is that the criminal did not commit the crime and escaped. but instead remained in the residence for several days after the murder. The crime was not identified until 5 days later. The reason is that no one noticed anything unusual in the surroundings of the house. There was smoke rising from the fireplace. The barn was full of food for animals, and everything seemed normal, which is why the crime was not discovered. On the 5th day of the crime, there was a worker. The worker knocked on the door, but no one answered. The worker decided to fix the machine because it was outside the house. After fixing the machine, the worker discovered something suspicious: a dog tied to the door. This dog did not exist. Here the worker made sure the family was inside the house. The worker did not have much time, so he decided to go looking for the family neighbor, whose name was Lawrence. The worker told Lawrence what had happened, and Lawrence decided to go to check on the family, especially as he had been nearly 5 days away and had not seen any of them. Lawrence arrived at the house and found nothing inside, then went into the barn and saw the family members killed. Lawrence immediately notified the police and began the investigation. The first suspect was Lawrence himself, because he was the closest person to them, and also because Lawrence wanted to marry the family daughter, but Father Andreas refused, and the investigation continued long until Lawrence was found innocent and the case closed in 2007. And here's another exciting story. Often the mind cannot understand what is hidden, especially when it comes to things in the underworld that are not completely known to us. Sometimes a person pays a high price for inadvertently tampering with this terrible world, but each of us must learn as much as possible about these worlds so as not to get bogged down in ignorance. One girl decided to write her entire story so that others would know what had happened to her, so that others would not make the same mistakes and become vulnerable to another world. One day, her father bought a luxury house that looked like a wealthy man's palace, and unexpectedly, it wasn't too expensive, and the girl suggested the house was abandoned and needed a lot of repairs. The first floor has an American kitchen, reception room, living room, and dining room. The dining room had a large table on which the king and prince were sitting to eat. In addition to the elegant, luxurious, and eye-catching bathroom. On the second floor there are 3 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, and a small room on the roof, which is very beautiful because its glass ceiling is perhaps the owner of the house would like to see the stars in the sky. The garden of the house is very large, and there are 2 front gardens full of flowers, but they need to be trimmed and beautified, and the other is the back garden, which has a large tree in appearance. It is older than home. There is also a beautiful hammock hanging in it, a parking spot, and a beautiful lake with great water for bathing. The girl made a cage for birds in every balcony in her house. The view was amazing and gave people a sense of psychological comfort, which was reflected in her study in record time and get information quickly. There is a small room in the house with repair tools and similar equipment, and the girl wants to take advantage of this room and turn it into her small kingdom, but she postpones this idea to a half-year vacation so as not to be distracted. Finally, the long-awaited vacation has arrived for the girl, and she can do with her whatever she wants. While preparing and repairing the room, the girl discovers strange and frightening drawings on the back wall that have a bad effect. There were bloodstains and fingers written, but an idea suddenly came to her mind. so she decided to take pictures of her and put them on social media to scare her friends. She began studying, and her friend came to study with her, but it was too late for her to sleep with her in the room she called my kingdom. One day, after finishing her studies, the girl wanted to watch a horror movie, and while watching the film, the girl and her friends started laughing hysterically and mocking people who were afraid of similar movies. Suddenly, the girl heard a sound coming from the lake. Right in front of the room, she gathered her courage to pretend to be brave and went out with her friends to find the source of the sound. And then the girl who owned the house imagined that there was someone in the lake. But when she threw her lamp at him, she saw only a tree branch, and then she and her friend slept. In the morning, the girl went to college as usual with her friends, and when she returned, she found that her father told her that she did not notice a dead cat near the door. So the girl entered her room and did not pay attention, as she has a lot of hard work for the university. So I decided to go to the kitchen and have a hot cup of coffee to finish the work. When she was leaving, she saw a man by the lake and thought he was her father. So she went to him to ask why he was so late and alone. Instead, I found a burning man, his features overlapping and stained with blood, his face covered with swollen eyes, and he fainted. The girl wakes up and finds herself in her father's bedroom, asking her why, telling him what happened, but he blames her for being overworked. After that, whenever the girl closed her eyes, she saw him. After she fell asleep, she woke up from the pain she had seen in her dream and found burn marks on her body. The girl decided not to sleep anymore and was busy with friends on social media, and once she found a man claiming to read the strange manuscripts. She remembered the strange words and sent them to him, and immediately asked her to meet him because of the need. When they met, she told him everything that had happened to her, and when he asked about her friend, she told him that she had not seen her in 2 days. When they arrived, they smelled a burning smell and found her friend burned from the fire. The man called the ambulance, and when the girl took care to accompany her friend, she prevented her, telling her that they had a duty to save her and her friend. The man taught her to circumvent her father, to get him out of the house so that nothing would happen to him, as happened to her friend. And the girl succeeded already, and as soon as they arrived at the house, the man spoke strange words. Then the girl fainted, and when she woke up, she found herself in the same house. But it looked strange, and the tree was very small, and the lake was the same. She found a man running toward her, and he entered the room, and when I spoke with him, he did not answer her. Then many young men chased him and tried to catch him, but he locked the door of the room on himself. They set fire to the room as they tried to capture him, and it was not possible to put out the fire, and after a while the fire went out. But he was completely burned, the man who had appeared before her and always wanted to harm her while she was sleeping. He was still alive, but when they learned he was alive, the men tied him to a tree branch and threw him into a lake until the traces of their crime faded. His father came but did not find his son, and he learned of the cruel things that had happened to him, so he decided to find his missing son, and he wrote these strange things on the wall of the room, and the girl read them. As soon as the father died, the ghost reappeared, and no one in the house could approach him, as everyone around him believed he was haunted until her father hired him. When she woke up, the man asked her directly where the body was. She pointed to the lake, and unfortunately, He was not swimming in the water, and the girl was afraid to see his ugly sight again. And he came up, gathered his strength, and came down into the water and found it. So she took him out, the man buried him, and life returned to normal as if nothing had happened.